What if I told you your alarm clock, your bank loan, your city commute, your legal system, even the concept of Monday, was all invented by mud brick rebels who whispered secrets into wet clay 6,000 years ago? Secrets so powerful they outlived empires. Secrets so urgent, we're still ignoring them. This isn't ancient history. This is your origin story, buried in the dust between two rivers. And it's screaming to be heard. Before Egypt's pyramids, before Rome's roads, before Stonehenge's stones, there was Mesopotamia. A sliver of fertile earth cradled by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, in what is now modern Iraq. Here humanity did the unthinkable. They stopped wandering. They planted seeds, they built walls, they looked at the stars, and asked, why are we here? And then they wrote down the answers, not on parchment, not on stone, but on humble, unbreakable clay. While marble crumbled and gold was stolen, their clay tablets survived wars, floods, and time itself. Why? Because truth sinks deep. And what they wrote? The world's first laws, the first poems, the first medical texts, the first story of a hero, Gilgamesh, who searched for immortality and failed. Sound familiar? He was the original influencer. His warning, you're gonna die. Make it count, and we're still not listening. But here's the twist they never taught you in school. Mesopotamia's greatest invention wasn't the wheel or beer. Yes, they invented that too. It was civilization itself, and it was built on 5 forbidden secrets. Secrets that shaped your world. And could unravel it, so lean in close because the clay is whispering. And what it says will change how you see everything. Let's begin at the very beginning. Not with kings or empires, but with dirt, seeds, and desperation. Around 10,000 BCE, as the last ice age retreated, the frozen grip that had constrained human potential for millennia began to loosen. In the hills and valleys surrounding the twin rivers, small bands of hunter-gatherers noticed something remarkable: wild wheat and barley growing in abundance. These early people had spent countless generations following herds and gathering seasonal plants, carrying their possessions on their backs, moving with the rhythms of nature. But now, in this changing world, they began to linger in places where food was plentiful. The first settlements were modest clusters of round huts made from reeds and mud, at sites like Tel Muribet, Tel Abu Huraira, and Jerf el Ahmar in what is now northern Syria. Archaeological evidence shows people beginning to establish permanent homes. They still hunted gazelle and gathered wild pistachios, but they stayed in one place, season after season. In the Jordan Valley, one settlement grew into something unprecedented. Jericho, perhaps the world's oldest continuously inhabited town, emerged 11,000 years ago. Its inhabitants built stone walls, not just for homes, but for protection. The first evidence of communal defense. They crafted mysterious tower structures, whose purpose remains debated by archaeologists today. Further east at Satal Hoyuk in Anatolia, another remarkable community developed. People built their mud brick houses so close together that they had no streets. Residents entered their homes through holes in the roof, moving across the settlement like ants through a complex mound. But the true revolution was happening quietly in the fields. Through careful observation and selection, these early farmers began to domesticate wild grains. Plants with larger seeds and husks that didn't shatter easily were favored. Generation after generation, wild grass became cultivated wheat. The deliberate growing of food had begun. Similarly, animals, once hunted, became herded. The wild aurochs, fierce ancestors of modern cattle, were gradually tamed. Sheep, goats, and pigs followed. The domestication of animals provided a reliable source of meat, milk, and hides, without the uncertainties of the hunt. This agricultural revolution spread gradually along the fertile arc of land, stretching from the Persian Gulf, up through the river valleys, and around to the Mediterranean coast, the Fertile Crescent. The transformation was not instant, but unfolded across centuries. The implications were profound. For the first time, humans could produce more food than they immediately needed. This surplus allowed some individuals to pursue crafts other than food production. Specialists emerged, potters, weavers, and tool makers, who could trade their creations for food. During the 6th millennium BCE, another pivotal innovation appeared: pottery. Though simple containers had been made from stone, wood, and woven reeds for millennia, the firing of clay created vessels that were both lightweight and watertight. Food could be stored longer. Liquids could be transported easily. As crops became more productive, early farming communities discovered a new challenge in the lowland plains between the rivers. Rainfall was scarce, but the annual flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates provided rich silt for growing. The people learned to dig channels to direct this water to their fields. The birth of irrigation. By the early 5th millennium BCE, small villages had grown into larger settlements across the southern alluvial plain, the land that would later be called Sumer. Sites like Eridu and Uruk began as modest farming communities but would eventually grow into something new, true cities. The management of water became central to these developing societies. Coordinating irrigation required leadership and organization beyond the family unit. Communal projects to build canals and dikes fostered more complex social structures. With agriculture came new challenges. Food surpluses needed protection from raiders and management for lean times. Religious beliefs evolved to address the uncertainties of farming life. The forces controlling rain, flood, and drought became personified as deities requiring propitiation. Temples began as simple shrines but grew more elaborate. Nearly 6,000 years ago, some communities were constructing dedicated buildings where specialists, early priests, performed rituals to ensure good harvests. These temples became centers not just of worship but of redistribution, where grain was collected and dispensed. Social stratification increased. Those who controlled the surpluses gained power. Those who interpreted the will of the gods gained authority. The egalitarianism of hunter-gatherer bands gave way to hierarchical communities with emerging elites. Tools evolved as well. Copper, first used for beads and decorative items around 7000 BCE, began to be shaped into more practical implements. 1,000 years later, metalworkers had discovered that copper mixed with tin created bronze, harder and more durable than pure copper. The Bronze Age had begun. Trade networks expanded dramatically. Obsidian from Anatolian volcanoes was highly prized for its sharp edges and traveled hundreds of miles from its source. Lapis lazuli from distant Afghanistan found its way to temple ornaments in the southern plains. Shells from the Persian Gulf appeared in inland settlements. Toward the end of the 4th millennium BCE, in the city of Uruk, another momentous development occurred. Facing the growing complexity of managing temple resources, administrators began using clay tokens to represent quantities of goods. These tokens eventually evolved into marks pressed into clay tablets, the world's first writing system. Initially, these marks were simple pictographs, drawings representing the items being counted. A picture of a sheep meant a sheep. Multiple sheep were indicated by multiple marks. But gradually the system became more abstract. Marks came to represent not just things but sounds. The birth of true writing. By the dawn of the 4th millennium BCE, the foundations of civilization, as we understand it, were in place. Cities with thousands of inhabitants, specialized crafts and professions, monumental architecture, complex religious institutions, social stratification, long-distance trade, and written records. The stage was set for the next chapter in this remarkable story, the rise of the Sumerians and the world's first true urban civilization. The southern alluvial plain, where the twin rivers approached the sea, became the heartland of humanity's first true civilization. Here, amid marshy deltas and fertile fields, a remarkable culture created something unprecedented in human history. A network of genuine cities, each housing thousands of inhabitants within their mud brick walls. Uruk, perhaps the most magnificent of these early urban centers, expanded rapidly after 3500 BCE. Archaeological excavations reveal a settlement that eventually covered nearly 250 hectares and may have housed up to 50,000 people. At its peak, massive defensive walls enclosed neighborhoods of densely packed houses, workshops, marketplaces, and administrative buildings. At the heart of Uruk stood its crowning architectural achievement, the White Temple. Perched atop a towering platform, this sacred structure rose like a mountain from the flat plain. Its whitewashed walls gleamed in the desert sun, visible for miles across the landscape. This platform, an early prototype of what would later develop into the classic ziggurat, demonstrated both engineering prowess and religious devotion. Other urban centers emerged across the landscape. Nestled near the ancient coastline, now far inland due to millennia of silt deposition, became a bustling port city. Eridu, considered by local tradition to be the oldest city, housed the temple complex dedicated to Enki, the god of wisdom and fresh water. Lagash, Kish, Nippur, and Umma grew into powerful city-states, each with its own distinct identity, ruling dynasty and patron deity. These cities were not simply large villages. They represented a fundamentally new form of human organization. Unlike earlier settlements, they housed diverse specialists, not just farmers, but metalworkers, potters, weavers, merchants, administrators, soldiers, and priests. Each city's architecture revealed its complex social organization, with imposing temples, administrative buildings, grand houses for elites, and modest quarters for commoners. The development of monumental architecture transformed the landscape. Temples evolved from simple shrines into elaborate multi-room complexes atop massive elevated platforms. These early ziggurats, though not yet achieving the stepped pyramid form of later periods, nonetheless dominated the skyline. By 3000 BCE, the city of Uruk featured a temple platform over 11 meters high, requiring more than 720,000 baked bricks for its construction. The question of who directed these monumental construction projects reveals another innovation of this society: institutionalized leadership. Early governance appears to have been a form of shared authority. Councils of elders and assemblies of citizens held significant power, but religious leaders, who controlled the temple resources, gradually assumed greater authority, becoming priest-kings or En in the local tongue. These early rulers derived legitimacy from their special relationship with the gods. They served as intermediaries between the divine and human realms. In times of crisis, war, flood, or drought, a temporary military leader might be appointed. These Lugal, literally meaning big man, sometimes parlayed their emergency powers into permanent kingship, gradually supplanting the authority of priests. By 2900 BCE, kingship had become firmly established in most cities of the region. Kings claimed divine sanction, though not yet divine status themselves. Royal tombs from this period display extraordinary wealth: gold vessels, elaborate jewelry, musical instruments, and the skeletons of retainers apparently sacrificed to accompany their ruler into the afterlife. Religious beliefs permeated every aspect of life in these early city-states. The pantheon included countless deities, with each city elevating its patron god or goddess to special prominence. Anu, the sky god; Enlil, the god of wind and storms; Enki, the god of water and wisdom; and Inanna, the goddess of love and war, ranked among the most powerful. The people believed these gods were much like humans in their emotions and needs, though vastly more powerful. Temples functioned as the gods' earthly dwellings, where priests performed elaborate rituals to please these divine residents. Daily offerings of food, drink, and incense sustained the deities, who might otherwise unleash flood, famine, or invasion upon neglectful worshippers. The cosmos was pictured as a flat disk, with the earth at its center, covered by a vault of heaven. Below lay the underworld, a gloomy realm where the spirits of the dead existed in a shadowy half-life. Unlike later civilizations, there was no promise of paradise for the virtuous. The afterlife awaited everyone, regardless of earthly conduct, a dimmer version of mortal existence. The understanding of the natural world blended practical observation with mythological explanation. Medical texts from this period show sophisticated knowledge of anatomy and treatments, yet attribute disease to divine displeasure or demonic influence. Similarly, advanced astronomy tracked celestial movements for agricultural and religious calendars, while interpreting unusual cosmic events as divine omens. One of the most far-reaching innovations of this culture, cuneiform writing, continued to evolve throughout this period. What began as simple pictograms for accounting gradually developed into a comprehensive writing system capable of expressing abstract concepts and recording spoken language. By 2500 BCE, scribes were using about 600 different signs to write, not just lists of goods, but letters, legal documents, medical texts, and literature. Literacy remained the privilege of a specialized class of scribes. Young boys from wealthy families began training in the tablet houses, the schools, around age 7, studying for years to master the complex system. These scribes gained considerable status, serving as administrators, accountants, and record keepers for temples, palaces, and merchants. The language of this early civilization, Sumerian, remained somewhat mysterious, unrelated to the Semitic or Indo-European language families. It stands as a linguistic isolate with no known relatives. Its distinctive grammar and sound system were eventually preserved in cuneiform. When later peoples adapted the writing system to their own tongues, literature preserved on thousands of clay tablets revealed a rich cultural tradition. The Epic of Gilgamesh, though compiled in its classic form, during a later period, originated in tales about a historical king of Uruk who ruled around 2700 BCE. This remarkable story follows its hero's quest for immortality after the death of his beloved friend, ultimately concluding that death is humanity's inevitable fate. Other important works include creation myths explaining how the gods fashioned humans from clay to be their servants, hymns praising deities and kings, and wisdom literature offering practical and moral advice. One poignant text, "Man and his God," wrestles with the problem of undeserved suffering, resembling in some ways the later biblical book of Job. This civilization also created the world's oldest known law codes. Though the famous Code of Hammurabi would come later, fragments of legal texts from around 2400 BCE show Sumerian society already concerned with formalizing rules for commerce, property, marriage, and criminal justice. One collection, the Laws of Ur-Nammu, established monetary compensation for injuries rather than the principle of physical retribution, the concept of an eye for an eye, found in later Semitic law codes. Economic life in these ancient cities revolved around the temples and palaces, which controlled vast agricultural estates. Temples employed thousands of workers to farm their lands, tend livestock, and produce textiles. These institutions developed sophisticated accounting systems, tracking income, expenditures, loans, and interest payments. Private commerce also flourished. Merchant families conducted trade expeditions to distant lands, exchanging grain, textiles, and manufactured goods for timber, metals, and luxury items. By the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE, trade networks extended to the Indus Valley Civilization, in what is now Pakistan, to the highlands of Iran and Afghanistan, to Anatolia, and down the Persian Gulf. Technological innovation accelerated during this period. The potter's wheel, appearing around 3500 BCE, revolutionized ceramic production. Wheeled vehicles, first evidenced around 3200 BCE, transformed transportation. Bronze metallurgy advanced significantly, producing stronger tools and weapons. Mathematical knowledge grew more sophisticated, developing a sexagesimal number system based on units of 60, whose legacy survives in our 60-minute hours and 360-degree circles. While the urban revolution transformed society, most people remained farmers living in the countryside or in the shadow of city walls. Their agricultural techniques became increasingly sophisticated. They developed specialized plows, irrigation systems with regulatory gates and levees, and methods for combating the increasing salinization of over-irrigated fields. The social hierarchy grew more complex as cities expanded. At the top stood kings, priests, and nobles. Below them ranked the professionals, scribes, merchants, and master craftsmen. The bulk of the urban population consisted of ordinary craft workers, laborers, and servants. At the bottom stood slaves, though slavery was not as pervasive as in some later civilizations, and often represented a temporary status caused by debt or wartime capture. Women in this society held more rights than in many later civilizations. They could own property, operate businesses, and even serve as scribes or priestesses, though the highest religious and political offices remained male domains. Marriage was arranged by families, typically with a bride price paid to the woman's parents. Divorce was possible for both partners under certain circumstances, though men had greater freedom in this regard. The city-states of this region existed in a near-constant state of competition and conflict. Disputes over water rights, boundary lines, and trade routes frequently escalated into warfare. Around 2500 BCE, the ruler of Lagash, Eannatum, conquered several neighboring cities and briefly unified much of the southern plain. His achievement proved short-lived, however, setting the stage for external conquest. By 2334 BCE, the political landscape of Mesopotamia stood poised for transformation. The independent city-states had developed sophisticated culture, technology, and social organization. But their internal rivalries left them vulnerable. To the north, in the region around modern Baghdad, a leader with unprecedented ambition was rising to power, Sargon of Akkad, who would create the world's first true empire. The legacy of this remarkable civilization would live on in the imperial systems that followed, as later peoples adopted and adapted its religious concepts, literary themes, artistic conventions, and scientific knowledge. Even after losing political independence, the cultural influence of Sumer continued to shape Mesopotamian civilization for millennia. To the north of the ancient city-states of Sumer, another culture had been developing in the central plains of Mesopotamia. These peoples spoke a Semitic language rather than the isolated tongue of their southern neighbors. Though influenced by the achievements of the oldest civilization, they maintained their own distinct identity, centered around their main settlement, Akkad. The exact location of Akkad remains unknown to modern archaeologists, but it likely stood somewhere near present-day Baghdad. From this city would emerge a figure whose ambitions would transform the political landscape of the ancient world. Sargon, whose name means the true king in his native language. The origins of Sargon are shrouded in legend. According to his own inscriptions, he was born to humble beginnings, the son of a gardener or date palm cultivator. A later tradition claimed he was a foundling set, adrift in a reed basket on the Euphrates River, much like the biblical Moses would later be portrayed. Whatever his true background, Sargon began his career as a cupbearer to the king of Kish, an important northern city-state. From this modest position at court, Sargon demonstrated remarkable political and military skills. Around 2334 BCE, he seized power in Kish, through circumstances now lost to history. Having established this initial base of power, he turned his attention southward toward the wealthy cities of the southern plain. Lugal-Zaggisi of Umma, the ruler who had briefly united many southern cities under his control, became Sargon's chief rival. The clash represented more than a mere power struggle between ambitious leaders. It was a confrontation between two different models of state organization. Lugal-Zaggisi sought to maintain the traditional city-state system with himself as paramount ruler, while Sargon envisioned something revolutionary, a unified territorial state under direct central control. In a series of military campaigns, Sargon defeated Lugal-Zaggisi and the allied forces of the southern cities. One inscription claims he washed his weapons in the sea, suggesting his armies reached the Persian Gulf. The victorious northern ruler then instituted a radical new approach to governance. Instead of allowing conquered cities to maintain their autonomy under local dynasties who paid tribute, he removed their rulers and installed loyal officials, often members of his own family, as governors. This administrative innovation marked the birth of the world's first true empire, a multi-ethnic state with centralized authority extending over a vast territory. At its height, this empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea, encompassing not only Mesopotamia, but parts of modern-day Syria, Turkey, and Iran. To bind this diverse realm together, Sargon implemented several unifying strategies. He established his native Akkadian tongue as the official imperial language for administration. He standardized weights and measures to facilitate trade and taxation throughout the empire. Perhaps most importantly, he created a standing professional army, reportedly numbering 5,400 men who ate bread daily before him. This military force, loyal to the ruler rather than to local cities or leaders, provided the coercive power necessary to maintain imperial control. The empire's economic foundations rested on agricultural surplus, extracted as taxes, control of vital trade routes, and the wealth of conquered cities. Trade expanded dramatically under imperial security, with caravans and ships carrying goods across unprecedented distances. Merchants from the empire ventured as far as the Indus Valley in modern Pakistan and into Central Asia in search of precious materials like lapis lazuli, carnelian, and tin. For the common people, this imperial system brought both benefits and burdens. Imperial peace and standardization facilitated commerce and cultural exchange. New irrigation works increased agricultural productivity in some regions. However, taxation was heavy, and labor could be conscripted for massive building projects or military campaigns. Rebellions were punished harshly, with city walls demolished and populations sometimes relocated. Sargon ruled for approximately 56 years, according to later king lists, though this may include the reigns of some of his successors. His long reign provided the stability needed for imperial institutions to take root. When he died around 2279 BCE, he left behind a transformed political landscape. The age of independent city-states had given way to the age of empires. His successors faced the perennial challenge of imperial rulers, maintaining control over diverse territories with different languages, cultures, and local interests. Ramush and Manishtushu, Sargon's sons, spent much of their reign suppressing revolts, but both died violently, possibly assassinated after relatively short reigns. Naram-Sin, Sargon's grandson, proved to be the most capable ruler of the dynasty after its founder. Ascending to the throne around 2254 BCE, he further developed imperial administration and embarked on ambitious military campaigns. In response to a massive rebellion of several major cities, he demonstrated both military skill and ruthlessness, crushing the opposition and rebuilding his grandfather's empire. After these victories, Naram-Sin took an unprecedented step in Mesopotamian politics. He declared himself a god. Previous rulers had claimed to be divinely appointed or to rule on behalf of the gods. But Naram-Sin had his name written with the divine determinative, the cuneiform sign indicating a deity. Official art depicted him wearing the horned crown traditionally reserved for gods. This elevation of the ruler to divine status reflected both the extraordinary power of the imperial office and perhaps a strategy to strengthen loyalty in a multi-ethnic realm where local religious traditions varied. Naram-Sin's reign represented the zenith of imperial power. His famous victory stele, discovered at Susa in modern Iran, depicts him as a heroic figure, physically larger than his soldiers and trampling defeated enemies. The artistic conventions established during this period, showing the ruler as superhuman in scale and achievements, would influence royal iconography throughout the ancient Near East for centuries to come. Despite these impressive achievements, cracks were appearing in the imperial edifice. Maintaining control over such vast territories with ancient transportation and communication technology proved increasingly difficult. Provincial governors, often members of the royal family, developed their own power bases. The costs of constant military campaigns to suppress rebellions strained the economy. External pressure also intensified during this period. Inscriptions from Naram-Sin's reign mentioned conflicts with mountain peoples called the Gutians, who raided from the Zagros Mountains to the east. From the northwest, the power of Ebla in Syria presented another challenge to imperial control. After Naram-Sin's death around 2218 BCE, his son Shar-Kali-Shari inherited these mounting problems. Though a capable ruler who maintained imperial power for a time, the centrifugal forces pulling at the empire proved too strong. Provincial areas broke away. External enemies pressed in. Economic troubles deepened. A later text dramatically describes these troubled times. Who was king? Who was not king? Suggesting a period of disputed succession and fragmented authority. This time of confusion lasted until approximately 2154 BCE, when the last nominal ruler of the dynasty was overthrown, bringing the empire to its end. Traditional Mesopotamian historical thought attributed this collapse to divine punishment for Naram-Sin's pride and his sack of the holy city of Nippur. Modern historians identify more concrete factors: the ecological strain of intensive agriculture, the administrative challenge of controlling vast territories, economic difficulties, and the constant pressure of surrounding peoples. After the fall of the empire, various successor states emerged across the region. In the southern cities, local rulers reasserted their independence. In the north, the Gutian mountain people from the Zagros range established control over parts of the former imperial heartland. The cultural impact of this first empire outlasted its political structures. The fusion of northern and southern traditions created a blended Mesopotamian culture that would influence the region for centuries.